In the previous videos, we saw how we can use these Apex AutoRig components and add a number of attributes to our guide skeleton. And if we look at our geometry spreadsheet, and again, instead of looking at the character stream, which is our entire character, we want to look instead at the component script. We can see these additional attributes that are defining the rig functionality, the rig logic. And we're going to be talking about a few of these specifically, mostly the parameters, the properties, and the tags. And the AutoRig components will create more of these, depending on what their functionality is, and then placing those attributes on specific joints. But there is another way of adding this kind of functionality, and that is by using a kind of variation on an attribute create. So we can deliberately create some of these attributes on these points based on what we know the functionality of our rig should be. And this will allow us to construct extremely procedural rigs that are driven by the attributes that we've placed intentionally on our guide skeleton. So our guide skeleton has attributes, and those attributes will influence how these components will construct the logic and layout. So in order to see that, we're first going to update our rig a little bit, our asset. So instead of just a box with a single transform, we have this little fellow with a kind of a turret on top, and he's got 4 legs to walk around. So that will let us not only explore some of these parameters and properties and tags, but we can add some additional AutoRig components and see how they work. So I've just updated the skeleton of this fellow to have these legs, and he's got a little sort of a look at thing for a turret, and then his geometry, he's got a kind of rocky body, and then this turret. So all very, very simple stuff, nothing complicated. And then I've taken that geometry and used Capture Pack Geo to capture to the skeleton, and the result of that should be something like this. So now we can enter the rig post state and move them around. If I grab this dome, I can rotate that. So there's the little turret. Here are the legs. And then because if we look at these legs that are built sort of straight out from the sides of his body, I didn't want to start that way. I didn't want the animator to have that as the starting position. I wanted them to be pointing, the knees to be pointing diagonally out from the center of his body. And so with a rig pose that's going into some of these attribute adjust dictionaries that we'll talk about in a minute, I've turned his, I guess, his kind of hip joints. So now this is his starting position. So his knees are pointing out. But that's the only adjustment that I've made to him. So again, a very simple character, just to add more interest to what we're doing. But let's talk about these 3 sort of concepts. Basically, in my case, I'm promoting transforms, making them available to the animator, making them available to the Apex components. I'm going to define some properties, and then I'm going to define these things called tags, which you can think of as very much like on a website. You might have a tag cloud that indicates some special kind of interest, and so you can click that tag and you get all the articles that have that tag. Well, we can use this concept On a rig, for instance, we have 4 legs, and each of them is going to have inverse kinematics. So I can put a tag on the joints of the legs, all of which are going to have IK. So I can use an IK tag. And then I can use that tag in a sense like a group, but it's not really the same. But conceptually, you can think of it a little bit like a group. Some kind of indicator on a joint about its name or its functionality or whatever you want. But we'll look at that in a future video. For now, we're just going to look at our skeleton, our guide skeleton. And here are our joints. And I know that I want to promote some of these joints. I know that I want them available to Apex. And so I can use this node called the attribute adjust dictionary. I can specify a group, so a single joint. And then the attribute name that I want to use is Parms. And you'll remember that when we were looking at the Apex auto rig component, that it had a node in its graph called Parms. So we can get a sense then that we are helping to define the inputs and outputs on that Parm node. And then down here in set values, because this is a dictionary, we have a key value pair. So for the root joint, that's this guy down here, I know that I want to promote the translation of the joint, the rotation of the joint, and the scale of the joint. And so I can use the key of promote and then the value TRS separated by a space. So now this attribute will be carried by this joint. And so when we then apply auto rig components to it, when we apply graph functionality to it, those graphs can, and in many cases will, find this attribute, Parms, and it will read it and say, the root joint should have translate, rotate, and scale promoted. And this is better and basically more powerful than relying on the auto rig components themselves to do this promotion. And you can see, we'll look later in this rig, I'm not promoting anything on this FK transform auto rig component because I know that these joints have this promotion attribute already. So I'm not doing it here. I'm rather doing it very specifically with an attribute adjust dictionary. So I'm doing that for the root node, which is going to get translate, rotate, and scale. What am I doing on this one? All of these joints, basically the joints that I know that are going to translate, I'm promoting them and giving them a T in their value. And then for this one, this other set of joints is getting rotation. Because I may want some joints to transform, other joints to just rotate. And then this root joint, of course, can do all three. And so being able to be very specific about what I want to promote and how I want it to be promoted is what makes using the attribute adjust dictionary and specifying this Parms attribute much more powerful than, again, relying on whatever is made available in an auto rig component. And the values set here will override the values that we set here. So it is kind of a one or the other. You can use the auto rig component to promote things, or use the auto rig or the attribute adjust dictionary to promote. Try not to use both, but my preference would be to use these, again, because I can be very specific about what I want to promote.